this is great. This is why we like this series, because I get to connect with my folks. I know we were on a Zoom together for Rosa's birthday, and there were so many people I didn't see you. So that's
here
great.
I am, Afro and all.
Afro. If you were going to the barbershop right now, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I like it though. Looks good.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
revolutionary of you. Yes.
Let's go with that. Let's go with that.
Yes, exactly. So Lumumba, you have been a lifelong Black radical organizer with the Malcolm X grassroots movement, with Black Lives Matter, with the movement for Black Lives. You've done a lot of work. You were formerly with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. But the work that you're doing now, and kind of what we wanted to get started talking about as we talk about the coronavirus, and one of the things we've been lifting up in this series is that there's not just a disproportionate impact for this umbrella term, people of color. There's a disproportionate impact on Black people explicitly and specifically, right? So it's specifically Black folks, who are 13% of the population, but more than half of the coronavirus deaths. I think it's like 58% of the deaths. We also need to think about why that is. It's not because we're not doing the social distancing. We know that Black people wash our hands more than any other group. I know that as a scholar, right? But I also know that as, someone whose mama always made us constantly wash our hands, right? We know that also, early data is saying that Black people are actually complying with the safer at home orders more than other groups, right? So we're not flocking to beaches and, laying out in the sun and drinking Coronas, right? That's other folks, right? But the reason it's hitting us harder is because of the pre-existing condition of racism. So when we think about how institutions are set up to victimize us, right? So we think about environmental racism. We've talked about that on this series. We've talked about environmental racism leading to asthma, right? Environmental racism leading to asthma, food deserts leading to diabetes, right? The stress of racism leading to hypertension. But we can also think about institutions like prisons and jails, creating conditions where, the federal prison near us, Terminal Island in San Pedro, the majority of the inmates have tested positive for COVID-19. And so
it leads the country, if I read that article correctly.
Yes. And I'm wondering if you can get that from, but also it's more than that. Talk about our political prisoners who, in addition to being incarcerated and in these very unsafe conditions, are also generally our elders, right? So there's the impact that this virus has on Black elders, right? So mainstream media keeps talking about the elderly, but they don't talk about what proportion of the elderly are Black, right? So again, that's also a number that should be raised. So can you just kind of start off by with that frame for us?
Sure. Well, I think your framing is a good place to start. But first, let me just say thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be in conversation with you all. And I appreciate the platform that you've created and been utilizing to not just inform people, but provide direction as to what we need to be doing, and to make sure that we actually are taking our destiny in our hand and changing the material conditions of our community. So I appreciate you all for doing that.
Thank you.
But yes, the framing that you laid out, I think, is a very good place to start. And I would say that if you look at all of that you mentioned in terms of the pre-existing conditions of institutional racism, of all of those things and how they land on Black people, imagine all of that within a confined, repressive environment. And that's prison, right? And we really can't understate the level to which cages, isolation, um, all kinds of terror, beat down not only on the mental health of an individual, but also the physical health. If we're going through a whole lot of craziness here because we are confined in our homes only for what, like 7 weeks now, maybe 8 weeks.
Right.
Imagine literally being in, a 6 by 8 cage. Imagine having to be strip searched when you go from one room to a next. So all of these things really compound the kind of well-being that you can imagine people having, and so it is exasperated tremendously in prison. And you also don't have the ability to exercise the kind of hygiene practice that we do on the outside to mitigate those kinds of things. So you can wash your hands with soap if you actually have soap, right? If you actually have hot water, if you actually have access to some of those things. So that's usually not the case. And so it's very much exasperated, and the people primarily who are holding this kind of weight are people who are elderly, people who have been incarcerated for decades, and this is a population of people who very rarely have the opportunity to see any kind of light at the end of the tunnel. So all of the kind of conversations that people are having around relief for people in prison usually are reserved for people who have light sentences, right? People who are not convicted of what they say violent crimes. So all of the criminal justice reform packages that we see happening, many of those don't include people who have violent convictions, right? And that term violent, of course, is used arbitrarily, but that's not something that is afforded to many of our folks who are long time, but not necessarily lifers, but lifers in the broader definition. And so we're looking at a very, very volatile situation for these folks. We've been working, we meaning Malcolm X grassroots movement, a number of other people in Jericho, a number of other political prisoner support organizing spaces around the country have been working around political prisoners for a number of decades, and primarily focusing on people who have been victims of COINTELPRO, primarily focusing on people who come out of the Black Power movement, the Black Liberation movement of the 60s and 70s. And one of those people is Dr. Mutulu Shakur. Dr. Mutulu Shakur is a lifelong activist who started his activism as a child, literally at the age of 16. Ended up joining the Republic of New Africa. At age 19, he ended up being arrested trying to defend black people in Detroit at the New Bethel shootout, when the Detroit police ran up in there trying to execute people who were having a rally. So Dr. Shakur has a very extensive history of contributing to the liberation of black folks, and has been in prison since 1986. And so we are part of a very lengthy process of trying to secure his freedom. Some of the things that people may know Dr. Shakur for, some of the most popular things, of course, is he happens to be the stepfather of Tupac Shakur. But I think more impactful than that, if I can be so bold as to say that, I know some Pac fans would be like, hey, what's more impactful than that? But he was also a doctor of acupuncture and created the Black Acupuncture Association of North America. What's important about this particular institution is BANA for short was a very important project in South Bronx that was designed to really deal with the issue of heroin addiction in New York City. Dr. Shakur went to China and was trained in acupuncture. He came back to the United States, to New York, and was using acupuncture as a detox method. And so, mind you, at this time, heroin, we're talking about in the mid 70s, heroin is skyrocketing. It's unreal the level to which the usage of heroin is pervasive through black communities. And so he's managed to actually create a process of detoxification through on top of that, also create a political education process where he is helping to formerly addicted people with an understanding as to why drugs were in their community in the first place, why was it so accessible, how it got there, why is it such a disparity in terms of who's using drugs, disparity in terms of who's selling it, who's getting caught selling it, how it feeds into the broader system. And so created a whole political education process and managed to detoxify hundreds of people and train dozens of others who then went and detoxified hundreds after that. One of the things that got the state and the city on his case was he ended up putting a huge financial dent into the methadone program. Methadone is a money-making detox program that takes heroin addiction and replaces it with methadone. And because of the acupuncture detox method, he was able to disrupt this financial machine. And so he was targeted by the city, but also he was providing significant amount of support to other parts of and factions of the Black liberation movement. I know you said that the programs that you all run usually close with the affirmation of Assata Shakur. You know, one of the things we always like to say that if we use that affirmation, if you feel it in your bones when you say it, if you get the chills when you say it, recognize that those words mean a lot, and there's some commitment to that, but also recognize that we're able to recite those words because she was able to be free and write them and send those words out. But she didn't just walk out of prison, right? There was a network that was organized. There was an organized process that actually got her out of prison. One of the convictions that Dr. Shakur was imprisoned for was assisting in the liberation of Assata Shakur. And so it's important to say that when we call her name, when we celebrate her release, there are a number of people who end up becoming targets of our celebration because the state comes down harder on them. And there are people who happen to be her co-defendants, people like Sundiata Acoli, who is approaching 90 years old and is still in prison. You know, people like Kamal Siddiqui, who happens to be her child's father, who was rearrested in 2002 and is now serving a life sentence in Georgia. And of course, people like Mutulu Shakur. And so we want to just say that when we say that affirmation, we have a responsibility to make sure that we commit ourselves to freeing her comrades and co-defendants.
Absolutely. And Lumumba, can you just leave us with, you know, a couple of things that we can do, because we need to bring on the other guests. You know, we could have absolutely spent the entire hour with you. But if there's some things that we can do.
What we can do, I'm asking folks to go to MutuluShakur.com. You can look at his website and see direction of what we're doing. We have a campaign now to grant him compassionate release from prison. The official application for compassionate release was denied by the Bureau of Prisons. This is an evil system. Mutulu Shakur last year was diagnosed with a bone cancer that is threatening his life. He is very much in a vulnerable state. He very much is part of the population of people who is probably in the line to contract the coronavirus. And we're trying to make sure that does not happen. He is ill, significantly ill, and we're trying to make sure that we have a very strong community support calling for his compassionate release. There is a petition that's up, and you can see the link on the website. Right now we have close to 11,000 signatures. We want to boost that up to 20,000. So we really want to get as many people to sign a petition as possible. The other two things that people can do is send him a letter. Send him a letter. Let him know that he's not forgotten. Let him know that he is loved. Let him know that he is supported. And then the last and most significant thing also is to make donations. The work that we're doing to try to release him, the legal work that's happening, the filings, all of those things cost money. We do not have any kind of money-making machine behind this. We come out of our pockets. We're doing fundraisers, so we need to get the resources to continue this work. And so I really charge everybody to go to the website, to donate, to write a letter, and to sign and forward the petition.
Right. And so we have lots of folks saying free all political prisoners. Absolutely. Lumumba, you're going to be able to stick around in the chat for a little bit, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So if you could drop addresses and the website there, we do have the petition link up already, but if you could drop everything up on the chat, that would be great. And we really appreciate you. We're glad that you're staying safe, sending you lots of love, and it's great to see you and appreciate your work as well.
Same here. Appreciate you all. All right. I'll stick around.